I'm Teisha with Shalom TV's news update for Thursday, January the 30th, 2014. A man who approached an Iron Dome missile battery near a lot today was shot and lightly wounded by the IDF after refusing to heed their orders to stop. The man, who has not been officially identified, ignored the IDF's calls and warnings to stop his approach towards the battery. The IDF spokesman's office reports that the man was taken to Yosef Tal Medical Center, where he was being treated, and that the IDF was investigating the incident. The Times of Israel reports, citing an Army radio report, that the man is an Israeli Arab and a resident of the Galilee Arab town of Majd al-Krum, and that he shouted Allahu Akbar, God is great, in Arabic as he rushed towards the soldiers stationed at the battery. The report further said that during the initial interrogation of the man, he confirmed that he planned on carrying out an attack, though it wasn't clear if he was armed at the time. The battery near Eilat was stationed there this past summer, with rising unrest and instability in Egypt and in particular in the Sinai region. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reportedly accepted the words of Israel's Trade and Economy Minister Naftali Bennett as an apology today, averting what some feared would be a coalition crisis in the Israeli government. As we reported to you, Bennett had slammed Netanyahu for comments he made about Jewish settlers remaining in the West Bank if they choose under Palestinian rule as a possibility in a potential peace deal. Many argue that the Prime Minister's statements were said for rhetorical purposes, intended to spark a reaction from Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. However, it elicited harsh criticism from Bennett. Bennett stated yesterday that he never intended to insult the Prime Minister and that he supports him when needed and criticizes him when needed. Israel's Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman weighed in on the controversy today, where he said that it's okay to argue with the Prime Minister but not to lash out at him. Lieberman also said that Netanyahu's words were misconstrued, saying there was never any intention to leave Israelis under Palestinian sovereignty. While speculation continues over what the framework plan that U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is set to present to Israel and the Palestinians will include, U.S. Ambassador to Israel Dan Shapiro tried to shed some light on that. Kerry is likely to present the framework plan to the parties soon that will enable negotiations to continue. Shapiro spoke at the International Conference of the Institute for National Security Studies at Tel Aviv University yesterday, where he said that the plan Kerry is working on is not just made of American ideas, but is drawn from what the Israelis and Palestinians presented. Shapiro said, as we continue our work at this stage to shape a framework proposal, it is very much drawn from ideas the parties have put on the table themselves. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, speaking at the same conference yesterday, reiterated his position that any agreement with the Palestinians had to include a demilitarized state that recognizes Israel as a Jewish state, and said that Israel was interested in continuing negotiations to reach such an agreement and that the Americans were too. In referencing Kerry's proposal, Netanyahu said that it reflected American positions and not necessarily Israeli ones, and that Israel was not obligated to agree with everything in it. And PLO Secretary General Yasser Abed Rabo said today in an interview with the Voice of Palestine radio that Kerry's proposals were Israelis' ideas. It was reported in the media earlier this month that Kerry would likely present his plan by the end of this month. A Reform synagogue in the city of Ra'anana in central Israel was vandalized with graffiti. The vandalism was discovered this morning on the outside walls of the Kehilat Ra'anan synagogue building. The Jerusalem Post reports that the graffiti referenced rulings from the Rambam or Moses Maimonides on non-believers, like there's no place for you in the next world. Following the incident, the Israel Religious Action Center sent out a press release in which the head of the Israel Movement for Reform and Progressive Judaism, Rabbi Gilad Kariv, called the vandalism a price tag incident, which refers to similar types of attacks thought to be carried out by Jewish right-wing extremists. Kariv said the incident would not deter the movement's service of families in Ra'anana that are interested in a Judaism that is tolerant and practices equality. The statement also quotes Kehilat Ra'anan Rabbi Tamar Kohlberg, who said that the sight of the graffiti was traumatizing. Kohlberg said, "I call on the Israeli community to awake from its slumber and take steps to bring an educational and social revolution that will allow all of us a meaningful Jewish way of life based on the greater worldview shown in the Torah." A few weeks ago, Reform rabbis began receiving state-paid salaries, and the vandalism is thought by some to be perhaps a protest of that.
Like most actors, my real job is saving
Actress Scarlett Johansson has stepped down from the charity Oxfam after they expressed disapproval of her relationship with Israeli company SodaStream. Oxfam had stated earlier that they were considering the implications of Johansson's role with SodaStream because they operate in the West Bank. As we reported to you earlier this week, Johansson had responded to that, defending SodaStream, saying that the company is committed to building a bridge to peace between Israel and Palestine, and that the factory located in the West Bank city of Ma'ale Adumim employs Israelis and Palestinians working side by side, receiving equal pay, benefits, and rights. Oxfam then released a statement saying that the actress's work with SodaStream was incompatible with her role as Oxfam Global Ambassador because they believe that businesses such as SodaStream that operate in settlements further the ongoing poverty and denial of rights of the Palestinian communities that we work to support. Johansson then made the decision to step down from the charity. The actress's spokesman released a statement yesterday saying she and Oxfam have a fundamental difference of opinion in regards to the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, saying Johansson is very proud of her accomplishments and fundraising efforts during her tenure with Oxfam. Oxfam said in turn that they accepted Johansson's decision to step down and were grateful for her many contributions over the past 8 years as ambassador.
incredible fashion sense.
Earlier this week, the Antidefamation League expressed their support for Johansson and her decision to stick with SodaStream and stand up to the BDS movement. ADL National Director Abe Foxman praised the actress for her, quote, principled opposition to those who have sought to use her relationship as a celebrity spokesperson for SodaStream to promote a divisive and highly politicized campaign. Foxman said Johansson's statement regarding SodaStream's positive example of coexistence between Israeli and Palestinian workers was an important rejection of the BDS view, which seeks to delegitimize the state of Israel. Foxman said BDS activists have long targeted SodaStream, saying these advocates oppose constructive dialogue regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and at their core reject Israel's Jewish existence and the two-state solution. And the New York Senate also took a stance against the BDS movement. The Senate passed a bill earlier this week that would prohibit private or public state colleges and universities from spending taxpayer money on academic groups that support boycotting a country or higher education institutions of a country. The bill is being seen as a direct response to the American Studies Association for their announced academic boycott of Israel late last year. The bill, introduced earlier this year by Democratic Senator Jeff Klein, passed on Tuesday by a vote of 51-4. Klein said this legislation sends a very simple message, which is that we should never ask taxpayers to support religious, ethnic, or racial discrimination. He said we need to marginalize the politics of intolerance whenever it rears its ugly head. Klein added, I will not allow the enemies of Israel or the Jewish people to gain an inch in New York. The First Amendment protects every organization's right to speak, but it never requires taxpayers to foot the bill. Under the new legislation, New York academic institutes could no longer reimburse students or scholars traveling to conventions of the three groups that have voted to boycott Israel, namely the ASA, the Native American and Indigenous Studies Association, and the Association for Asian American Studies. And state schools would no longer be allowed to pay membership fees to the ASA. And turning to our Shalom TV programming for tonight, Thursday, January the 30th. Tonight at 8 o'clock, novelists Dara Horn and Anna Solomon join Joshua Lambert to discuss the uses of history in American Jewish fiction. That's at the American Jewish Historical Society's Biennial Scholars Conference. And then tonight at 9, Sarah Esther Crisp of JewishWoman.org And Rabbi Jeffrey Siegelman of the Westchester Jewish Center joined Mark Golub on L'chaim to discuss the 10 Commandments and the Jewish notion of miracles. That's tonight on Shalom TV and shalomtv.com. And that's Shalom TV's news update for Thursday, January the 30th, 2014. I'm Teisha Bader.